Here is what no one will tell you about the scandal king Edward VIII. His tragic pro-German sympathies were not a sudden fascination or a political mistake. Their roots run deep into his childhood, into the very structure of European monarchies, where blood ties were more important than national borders. Born on June 23, 1894, Prince Edward was surrounded by German influence from childhood. And it wasn't just his personal tastes, a passion for German beer, cars, and culture. His very blood was half German. His grandmother, Queen Victoria, was of German descent. A complex network of family ties intertwined all the royal courts of Europe, making the line between us and them almost arbitrary. For the future king, Germany was not an enemy, but the home of his numerous relatives. But then the First World War broke out, and this family world collapsed. For the prince, who witnessed the horrors of trench warfare, the conflict became a personal trauma. He was desperate to avoid a repeat of this slaughter at any cost, which later made him dangerously receptive to the idea of appeasing Hitler. His desire for peace transformed into something more sinister, an admiration for a strong hand capable of imposing order. Here is what the experts hide from you, preferring the romantic version of his abdication. In 1933, in a conversation with a relative, the prince let slip a phrase that today sounds like a verdict. "Dictators are very popular these days. We might want one in England soon." This was not just a careless word. It was a fully formed worldview that would later define his destiny and endanger the entire British Empire. In 1931, a meeting took place that would overturn not only the prince's life, but the fate of the entire British Empire. He met Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American from Baltimore. But was she just a charismatic socialite? Here's what happens behind the closed doors of high politics. FBI documents show that Wallis was suspected of spying for Nazi Germany. It was alleged that she was having an affair with Joachim von Ribbentrop, the future foreign minister of the Third Reich. It was said that he sent her 17 red carnations for every night they spent together, a cynical payment for information. This was not paranoia. From 1936, the British counterintelligence agency MI5 began wiretapping the king's own telephone conversations, fearing leaks of state secrets through his mistress. The government considered her a real threat. So what was it about this woman that so captivated the heir to the throne? Contemporaries described her not as a beauty, but as a domineering and calculating individual, capable of manipulating men. Historian Andrew Lowney goes further, characterizing their relationship as a, quote, sadomasochistic partnership, in which the weak and insecure prince found his dominant mistress. Wallis Simpson had entered the game, and the stakes were higher than just love. The crown was on the line. On January 20th, 1936, Edward VIII ascended to the throne. His reign would last only 325 days. The official reason for the constitutional crisis that erupted was his unwavering desire to marry Wallis Simpson. The British establishment, led by Prime Minister Baldwin and the Archbishop of Canterbury, was categorical. The coronation of a monarch married to a twice-divorced American was impossible. On December 10, 1936, the king abdicated, delivering his famous radio address. "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility without the help and support of the woman I love." This speech turned his departure into the greatest love story of the 20th century. But what if everything you believed is untrue? Today, more and more historians believe that the true reason for the abdication was not romantic feelings, but the king's pro-Nazi sympathies, which were unacceptable to the government amid rising tensions in Europe. A monarch who admired Hitler was a ticking time bomb. A theory exists that the government simply used the Simpson problem as a perfect and respectable pretext to remove an inconvenient, unpredictable, and politically dangerous king who could have dragged the country into a catastrophic alliance. After receiving the title of Duke of Windsor following his wedding to Wallis on June 3, 1937, Edward took a step that finally shattered the myth of the romantic exile. In October of that year, the newlyweds embarked on a 12-day visit to Nazi Germany. This was not a private trip, but a political demonstration. Here is what happens behind the closed doors of high diplomacy. The Duke and Duchess were received at the highest level, private audiences with Hitler, Himmler, Goebbels, and Rudolf Hess. But this is what they won't show you in the official chronicles. Photographs of the Duke giving the Nazi salute circled the globe. He wasn't just posing. He was openly demonstrating his loyalty to the new regime. In a personal letter to Hitler, written in German, Edward thanked him for a, quote, wonderful time in Obersalzberg. The reaction in London was furious. The British government was enraged by the unauthorized visit. Churchill, not yet Prime Minister, called the trip highly inopportune and dangerous. But the most closely guarded secret of this trip was revealed in Goebbels' diary. The Third Reich's Minister of Propaganda wrote, "The Duke understands our policy and fully approves of it." This was no longer a naive admiration for a dictator, but a conscious political act that showed the whole world which side the former British monarch was on. With the outbreak of the Second World War, the romantic story of love and abdication finally gave way to the harsh reality of betrayal. Here is the hidden truth that everyone ignores, preferring to talk about feelings. In February 1940, Count Julius von Zech, a German diplomat, reported to his superiors that the Duke of Windsor had leaked the Allies' plans for the defense of Belgium to the Nazis. When German troops advanced on Paris in May 1940, the Duke's behavior confirmed the worst fears. He fled the city in disgrace, abandoning everything. His own aide-de-camp, Edward Metcalfe, wrote to his wife with contempt, "I despise him. He has deserted his country when every clerk and cripple is trying to do his bit." This was not mere cowardice. As British officers would later recall, the Duke's behavior bordered on treason. And this was no exaggeration. French intelligence also reported on the Duke's secret contacts with German agents through neutral countries. The former king, it seemed, had finally chosen his side, and it was not the side of his homeland. In the summer of 1940, the British government's patience ran out. Here's what happens behind closed doors when a former monarch becomes a pawn in the enemy's game. The Nazi leadership launched Operation Willi, a secret plan to kidnap or convince the Duke to remain in Europe while he was in neutral Portugal. The goal of this operation was brutally clear and monstrous. In the event of a successful invasion of Great Britain, the Germans planned to overthrow King George VI and install Edward on the throne as a puppet ruler, completely under their control. The Duke had transformed from a sympathizer into a real threat to national security. Churchill's reaction was swift and harsh. On July 1, 1940, he sent the Duke a telegram in which he unequivocally threatened a court-martial for insubordination. "A refusal to obey direct orders from the High Command will be met with serious consequences." The ultimatum worked. To isolate the Duke and cut off his contact with the enemy, on August 1, 1940, he was forcibly sent into exile, appointed as governor of the Bahamas. Edward was furious, contemptuously calling his new post a, quote, third-rate British colony. When informed of the appointment, he is rumored to have exclaimed, "What the devil? It's the end of the world." For him, it was a humiliation. For the British government, it was the only way to neutralize a traitor. The problem of the Duke of Windsor had long ceased to be an exclusively British one. He and his wife were being closely watched from the other side of the Atlantic. What was found in the old FBI archives, declassified decades later, confirms the worst fears. We are talking about a 227-page dossier, meticulously compiled on the Windsor couple. This was not just a collection of rumors. It was the methodical work of a special service. Transcripts of telephone conversations, agent testimonies, and photographs of the ducal couple's meetings with German officials. You won't see this in the news, but in one of the entries from 1941, an FBI agent makes an unambiguous conclusion. The Duke of Windsor is considered a German agent of influence. The seriousness of the situation is also underscored by the fact that the case was personally overseen by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. He considered the Duke a direct threat to the security of the United States. Declassified in the 1990s and 2000s, these documents became further proof that the suspicions were not just justified, they were deadly serious. American intelligence, unlike the British government, was not bound by delicacy towards the royal family and recorded everything. In 1945, as the smoke was still clearing over the ruins of the Third Reich, American troops made a discovery that could have buried the reputation of the British monarchy forever. This was the Marburg Files, a secret archive of the German Foreign Ministry containing the Duke of Windsor's correspondence with the Nazi leadership. These documents confirmed regular contact and the existence of political agreements. But the most cynical twist in this story came in 1946 during the Nuremberg trials. Sitting in the dock, the former German foreign minister Joachim von Ribbentrop made a desperate move. He requested that Edward be summoned as a witness for the defense. Here is the hidden truth the British government tried to bury. Ribbentrop cited their 1936 agreement to establish the closest relations between England and Germany. In effect, he was threatening to expose the entire inside story of their secret alliance. The Duke refused to testify, but he also did not deny the existence of these agreements. The British government, panicking at the potential scandal, immediately classified most of the discovered documents for 50 years, releasing only the most innocuous fragments. The truth was too dangerous for the world to know. After the war, a long era of quiet oblivion in Paris began for the Duke of Windsor. He became a private citizen, but could never reconcile himself to his loss of status. His repeated requests for the restoration of his rights and a return to England were invariably rejected. The royal family never forgave him, not so much for his marriage to Wallis as for his betrayal during the war. The symbol of this unwavering alienation was Wallis's title. The family categorically refused to grant her the style of Her Royal Highness, a trifle to outsiders, but a daily humiliation for the Duke. On May 28, 1972, at the age of 77, the former king died. He was buried at Windsor. Of the entire family, only Queen Elizabeth II attended the funeral, a gesture that was more protocol than reconciliation. In its obituary, the Times newspaper accurately captured the essence of his tragedy. The man who chose love over a crown has died, but perhaps that was not the only reason for his choice. The romantic legend he had so carefully constructed had begun to crack. What if everything you believed about the greatest love story of the 20th century is untrue? Modern historians, relying on declassified archives, are increasingly leaning towards the version of political, rather than romantic, motives for the abdication. As Professor Andrew Lowney states, the abdication of Edward VIII was not a romantic story, but the removal of a monarch who was potentially dangerous to democracy. The psychological portrait that emerges from the documents confirms this. Emotionally stunted, prone to authoritarian decisions, and admiring of strong power, Edward represented a real threat. What would have happened if he had remained king? Many experts believe that Britain might have sought a separate peace with Nazi Germany, which would have completely changed the course of history. So, was the story of Wallis Simpson a great love affair, or merely a convenient cover for the removal of a Nazi-sympathizing king? The declassified documents speak for themselves. What do you think? Let us know in the comments.